So, welcome everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our next episode of Wisdom of the Mystics. And I'm honored to be here. I'm Reverend Kathy Mastroianni. I'm Executive Director of the Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, who is really dedicated to really bringing the wisdom and the history of new thought to make it practical and useful and alive in our lives. And it's my great honor to be here. We're going to be presenting a special mystic whose birthday is tomorrow. He'll be 219, and honestly, he doesn't look a day over 218. But I'm going to pass it over to my beloved colleague here, Laura Topper.
Oh, thank you, Reverend Kathy, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here. And yes, you're joining us here on Wisdom of the Mystics today, a very exciting broadcast because we have an incredible spiritual leader and wisdom teacher here to present Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I just love it that he's 219 years today. Wow. That's amazing. And that we're talking about him all these years later and knowing the work that he has done and shared and gifted in the consciousness of Ernest Holmes. Isn't that incredible? That we can and learning more about Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so today we are excited. I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Petra Weldes, who is the co-spiritual leader for CSL Dallas. And Dr. Petra is a teacher and leader and visionary. And she came on to Wisdom of the Mystics in February to talk about Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. And I learned so much from her. I'm sure you were watching that. You've also gleaned a lot from Dr. Petra and what it is that she shared. So I'm excited to be with Dr. Petra. I'm going to bring her into the stream right now and welcome you onto the show. Welcome.
I'm so happy to be here with you too again. I'm so happy to be here and talking about one of my favorite topics, Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's very cool. We can say happy early birthday.
We can. Isn't it amazing how we're each kind of drawn to different people and their different energies and their different teachings, and how you love Ralph Waldo Emerson and celebrate him and have learned so much from him. And I wonder who was Ralph Waldo Emerson? You know, what was he really like in his day-to-day life as an everyday person?
Well, you know, it's really interesting to learn about Emerson because most of us, we studied Emerson in school, right? You ran into Emerson in literature class, either in 8th grade or and that was, God forbid, you had to read this person. Or maybe if you were lucky in college and it's all this, you know, very high-minded, you know, essays, and you're trying to figure out what he's talking about. And one of the most interesting things I think to know about Emerson, like Ernest Holmes, he actually hated school. And in his journals, he talks about how much more he learned by walking in nature, how he couldn't wait to ditch his classes when he was young, and, you know, Latin and Greek, and they read all, you know, Aristotle and all that stuff. And I mean, he did the schoolwork, but he would much rather be out in nature, much rather be out in the fields. And that was really where he took his inspiration. As you read Emerson, if you don't have a classical liberal arts education, right, that's one of the things that makes it hard to read because, I mean, all the men were educated that way, not necessarily the women, but the men were certainly educated that way, the white men in this country. And so you have to know some of the references, but himself, that wasn't where he drew his inspiration. He drew his inspiration by walking around in nature. And the other thing that's really interesting to know about Emerson is what an extremely private person he was. He did not necessarily, he didn't really like the crowds. He was very suspicious of sort of the mob mentality. And that was a big part of his whole self-reliance movement, the self-reliance essay, right? Rely on yourself. Don't look at what your neighbors are doing. Don't get swept up in the mob. Don't get swept up in the, oh, everything's better in Europe, we should be like them, or whatever it was, right? Think your own thoughts. And he would walk in the woods of Concord, Massachusetts, and he would think his own thoughts. And he would study nature and think his own thoughts. And so he went on to do some, what we might consider some pretty bombastic things. You have to really you have to really think about it. So he's a line of preachers, and he got invited to go to speak at the Divinity School, his Divinity School address, and basically gets up there and he says, y'all, all you're doing is regurgitating what everybody said over the last hundreds of years. Stop doing it. Think for yourself. Well, it was 30 years before he was asked back. And then the same thing, he did in fact become a minister, and he stood up in his congregation and he said, I can no longer do the Lord's Supper. And he told them why. He said, it's no longer in alignment with what I believe to be true about God and about religion and about life. And so I'm no longer going to do the Eucharist. I'm no longer going to have communion. And yeah, there you go. And if you still want me, great. If you don't want me, great. But I'm not doing it anymore. It's powerful. It's powerful. These addresses are so amazing. And they had to, that wasn't an easy conversation for them to have and the leaders to have. I mean, they really loved Emerson. They thought he was amazing, but they wanted to have communion in their Sunday morning church service. And ultimately they said, well, no, we can't do that. And he left I mean, those kinds of things, to have that kind of self-presence, right? And in very public places to do that. But what he didn't do, which is really interesting, is he didn't do it privately. He didn't harangue people. He was actually very private. He was pretty much an introvert. So he did all of that stuff publicly, right? He went on the Chautauqua speaking circuit, and so he was very eloquent in his writing and his speaking, but he was actually relatively private personally. The other thing that is really interesting to understand is how really his life was impacted. He married the love of his life early on, and they had a child, and she died, I think 2 or 3 years into their marriage. She died early, and it absolutely broke his heart. And not too long after that, his first son died. And those two deaths had an enormous impact on him. Actually, he went to Europe and he visited with the Romantic poets there. He was very, very moved by that, and that really became that the seed of his transcendentalism was actually this deep sorrow, this deep experience. I mean, we think of him as this intellectual genius, and yet it was this deep experience of his own life. And then he did get remarried, and they did have a number of children. And one of the most interesting things is to discover that Lydia, his second wife, Lydia Jackson, she wasn't so sure about the things that Ralph Waldo Emerson was teaching and talking about. She was not so sure about that at all. Actually, she wrote a scathing criticism of the detachment that can come when one says, well, I'm self-reliant, I'm responsible for my life. Well, you're responsible for yours, so get on with it. Be responsible for your life. I'm not responsible for you, right? And she writes this scathing satire that is really amazing to read. And this was the woman he was married to, for the bulk of his married life. It's fascinating. Of course, he was very much, a proponent of Alcott and Hawthorne, and of course Henry David Thoreau bailed him out of jail. And when we have this idea that Henry was this woodsman, and of course what we don't know is that 2 or 3 times a week he was hiking out to Emerson's house to have dinner, and he was the uncle to the kids, and he wasn't quite so out there all by himself as it, sort of makes it out to be. But that was a huge relationship in Emerson's life. And then the last thing I would say, just kind of to give the overview, is his whole evolution into abolitionist and anti-slavery. And
Right.
what a interesting walk that was for him, to find that place of self-reliance that says everybody really is themselves, and yet here are people who can't be. And some of his other mystical writings of the Oversoul and all of that really helped him embrace a larger idea. And he was very anti-mob, that whole thing, and when there were protests or crusades or mobs, even if they were abolitionists, he was like, but as he developed his consciousness around all of that, he really began to be able to say that maybe actually greater self-reliance comes when one thinkingly engages with a mob, not unthinkingly, right? But one is inspired by that, and one is kind of drawn into that actually a greater self-reliance is actually developed. But that was a 15-year process for him. That he then, and of course the big thing, he wasn't about, down with the, slave owners and all that stuff. The place where he could really find his place to stand was to be about the fugitive slave law, right? And no, that's just not okay. That's not appropriate. It's not okay. It's, of course, what he bailed Thoreau out on for not paying that tax. And and so it's interesting to watch him find his way through as his own engagement with his own ideas developed. So it's, and let me just say one last thing I would say is that we read him as literature and poetry, and we associate him with the great literary writers of that period of time. And Thoreau gets the accolades of being the first American philosopher. And we miss out because of that on Emerson's philosophy and his metaphysics. And actually, when I take tours and we go to Emerson's house, and you have the docents, they walk you around and they tell you about, this is where he got married and this is where he would sit and blah, blah, blah. And here's, his books and all that stuff. It's all very interesting. All they ever talk about is his artistry as a writer. It's so interesting that they have no association with his actual philosophy at all. They don't talk about it. They don't, it's all about his being an essayist and a speaker. And like the idea that a spiritual group of people would go on pilgrimage to their house from Dallas, Texas, blew their minds. They were like, okay, we don't really quite get why you're here. It was mind-boggling. And I thought, you have no idea. You have no idea who you have here. And that is so unfortunate that Emerson was lumped in with literature as opposed to philosophy.
That's so amazing that you say that, because I often hear, being here in the UK, I know Emerson is studied obviously universally around the world. And I often hear in movies people talking about Emerson from a really unmetaphysical point of view. And I think, well, if he was studied, if he is studied like that in universities around the world, why isn't the metaphysical part, more universal and expansive than it is? So they just they kind of, yeah.
They talk about the turn of phrase and how beautifully he says things, and but yeah, because it doesn't quite line up with party line somehow. I mean, it's it's such a disservice to his writing, truly such a disservice to his writing to have it be, and besides, he's, as I said earlier, I said before we started, don't bother reading his poetry. His poetry is terrible. Don't read his poetry. It's terrible. He was inspired by Walt Whitman and William Wordsworth. And it was like, no, you should stick to essays, essays and speaking. He was a really good speaker.
Nice. And again, like Fiona said, we love this inside scoop on him. And I just love to get context, for who he was and, because he really was foundational for science of mind. I mean, Ernest Holmes found him, and it just, and like Diego says, like drinking water, it was just like, it was so awakening for Ernest to find Emerson, but to hear a bit of the background, he was kind of a rebel, and that he was a huge rebel. That's just so, again, it's powerful because even Reg Armour in one of his books said, we are religious rebels. And so I think we've kind of taken that baton and carried it on. So it's inspiration for all of us watching here and are here, to be open at the top and to be creative and to listen to that inner wisdom, so we can be our own spiritual authority, which is,
Yes. And he makes the point that that's not easy. Right. That's not easy at all.
Yeah.
And so in the 60s that, they latched onto the Emersonian phrase, do your own thing. Right. And that was then vilified as, well, do your own thing, do anything you want. Do anything you want. It doesn't really matter. And you can just make a mess and right. And if you read that whole portion of Self-Reliance, it says, do your thing and I will know you. Do the thing that is after your constitution, which what he means is do the thing that is in alignment with your deepest self. Right. And then you can do no wrong. And the universe, all of nature conspires to support you. Right. But it's not just do your thing in a vacuum. And then he goes on to talk about then the choices that we make. And he says the choices we make, we don't make out of our character. He says we make it out of the eating and drinking man, like out of our appetites and out of our addictions and out of our, and out of the, whatever the advertising has told us to want. But to do your own thing based on this, right? To stand up there in a Christian church and say, I'm sorry, I can't do the communion anymore. Like, wow. Not because you're wrong, but because I'm living in alignment with my deepest spiritual truth. That's like, and somebody I saw just put across the chat, it is the hardest thing in the world. And it is the thing I think that is the most easily vilified around science of mind and new thought. Oh, that's that spirituality that you can do your own thing. And I want to say to them, okay, could you just practice it for a year? Go ahead. I dare you. I dare you to be that truthful and that in alignment with yourself and absolutely seeking to be love and joy and peace and all. Like, go ahead. You just show me how easy that actually is.
I love
and
that.
Do you think that do you think that he was really as I'm hearing you, that he was really unfolding this idea, or he was really bringing forth this idea that there is what Ernest Holmes, called this race consciousness, this mass consciousness. And it feels like he was saying, we don't have to go with the crowd, go with the masses. We can really hone in on who we are, this know yourself kind of Socratean idea that when we know ourselves, that we're really living our divine nature beyond
that.
the
See what
thought
you just said,
process.
Laura, that's the piece that's missing, right? That is so missing in all the ways in which Emerson is read, is be yourself, and then you will know your divine nature, right? Because if you just read Self-Reliance, it's all about being independent, being yourself. Don't imitate others. Don't do it, right? All of that. But you have to read the rest of his work that talks about that exactly what you said, that then you're open to the divine nature, and that's what actually you're expressing, right? His essay on Oversoul is truly one of the most beautiful things ever written, ever. And he really, he's able to talk about that without any of the religious and old language trappings that, I mean, it's just mind blowing when you read that. And he says, the fact that I am here shows that the soul had need of an organ here. Shall I not assume the post? I love that. What an invitation. Right. Yeah. And when he says the soul, he means the one infinite life, right? The soul of life itself, the heartbeat of the universe needs us. Without each of us, one infiniteness of the universe, of the infinite, isn't expressed. You're here because the soul had need of an organ here, that oversoul that is your soul expressed. And what an invitation, right? And so, yes, he's kind of saying don't go with the mob, and right, he talks about don't travel, which of course I don't agree with because I absolutely love to travel, but it's all right, I get to disagree with him. It's okay. And but what he's talking about, right, is that we make all the choices based on the outer life and what we're taught and what we should want and all that, stuff. But it is that it's the soul that is the oversoul is us. And he talks about I love the idea. I've spent a lot of time with this visualization. There's no bar or window between me and the oversoul. There's no place where my soul ends and the oversoul begins, right? To really see that that's a continuity. And sometimes in our spiritual mind treatments, when we talk about unification, it's like we're trying to bridge a gap. No, there's no gap. There's no gap. No gap. I mean, it was those statements in Emerson that, for me were like, oh, what does that mean? I had to try to imagine, well, how can I even imagine that? How do I make that real? And then it just right. It's mind and heart blowing. Imagine you're invited to be your best self. The universe invites you to that. Oh, man. No wonder, this Ernest Holmes, he read at Ralph Waldo Emerson, it was like the door opened. The door just opened for him. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing Ernest Holmes talks about, is that part of the door that opened was, wait, that's true for me, but it's also true for you and you and you and you and you, right? Whenever Emerson is using the archaic man, right? I mean, he's talking about every single solitary human being, period, end of sentence. And that these things are ubiquitous, and that was a part of the mind-blowing thing for Ernest Holmes. You didn't have to be saved, and you didn't have to be somebody, and you didn't, by virtue of the fact that you're here, that's true.
That's beautiful. There's a quote from an article in the archives that says, when Ernest Holmes read Emerson's essays on spiritual laws, he began to understand the true meaning of the soul, that there's an essence in each of us that remains pure and untouched, that we can know neither deformity nor pain. Only the finite can suffer, for the infinite lies stretched in smiling repose.
Right. Repose. So it's just, I love that.
I know, right? I know. So there's this godlike essence in all of us, just like you were saying. And I just think that's, again, foundational for our teaching. And
Right. It's beautiful. And when we're doing our spiritual work, we're trying to be in that space of smiling repose, not to withdraw from the world, not to not act within the suffering, but to do it from that place of repose, right? Of knowing the truth. And I think that, it was Emerson's spiritual laws that also opened the door for Ernest Holmes and his really profound understanding that the natural laws are the way in which we get a hold of the spiritual laws, right? That we see, oh, well, if there's laws here, well, of course there are spiritual laws, right? And Emerson talks about that so beautifully. I will tell you that the first time I read the essay Compensation, oh man, I threw the book across the room more than once. It made me so mad. It's like, what do you mean? Oh, it made me so mad because it's like, there's no wiggle room here. Consciousness is consciousness. Cause is cause and the effect is inevitable, period. End of sentence. You want to change it, you have to do the work in consciousness to change the cause, period. End of sentence. You can't, there's no wiggle room in that. Oh, it made me so mad because I was brought up on love and grace and, divine intervention. And somehow if I was just good enough or, nice enough to my mother or whatever it was, did the rosary or did the thing, somehow, you could get away with things. You could oh, I hated compensation for the longest time. I was like, no. But it's super powerful to, take that kind of radical responsibility for your own life.
So I wonder if Emerson, I've always been really interested in because his spiritual awakening and how that was happening and unfolding for him in nature. And I know that for Ernest Holmes, maybe he obviously had direct experiences along the way, and yet he had a more connected mystical experience towards the end of his life. And Emerson, I always feel like, oh, well, he was really teaching and talking from his own personal direct experience of witnessing and feeling something really within himself that he discovered in nature, and how that loss of his son and his wife really must have just brought him to such a place of hopelessness that it's almost like had that breakdown and then breakthrough.
Yeah, I just told my son.
I just
Go ahead.
I just wondered if you could speak on more about that and his actual awakening and how that's come through his writings profoundly.
When you read Emerson's journals, there's 12 of them, and then you can get a beautiful and abridged version. I never got the feeling that he had the road to Damascus experience. My reading of his journals, it felt to me like his spirituality matured as he himself matured. That his awakening, it felt very natural, very. And I guess the thing that I think is so amazing about Emerson is how embedded in nature and in the physical experience he was, right? And he's considered the high priest of Transcendentalism. And this idea that Transcendentalism is all about transcending the material and, and seeing the ideal and, being in that space. And we misunderstand that at our peril. He saw that. I mean, if you read the statement, Sermon in the Stones, Emerson was one of those people who lived it. And when he writes in his journals about his experiences, it's like nature is revealing spirit to him all the time. And he doesn't even think about it. It's not like, oh, I'm having a mystical experience. Wow, isn't this cool? Aren't I wonderful? Blah, 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 right? And he seldom, if ever, uses the term God, right? Because he doesn't want to be confined in that, whatever that is, that thing over there, that old thing over there. He seldom uses it, but I get it. So yeah, so I don't know of any like particular experience per se. I do think you're right, Laura, that the death of his beloved wife and his firstborn son broke him open, and he actually went to Europe twice.
Yeah.
Very depressed, very dark, very, and the people that he met there and that he walked with there really, really nurtured his heart and his spirit. And I think gave him the opening or an opening to articulate beyond the confines of the New England Puritan inspired Calvinistic congregational kind of presentation of religion, of Christianity, and they were already breaking out of all of that. And I think that was really helpful to him. To me, that's one of the things that's so amazing about the science of mind, and why I think Emerson is so seminal to the science of mind, because we don't separate the human experience and the physical world from the one. It's not like, oh, there's the absolute spirit and it's beautiful and wonderful, and then there's like, this things you can't say on the radio down here that you want to get out of or over or, transcend or all of that. And he was like so embedded in it. And he loved nothing more than to have Thoreau and Louisa May Alcott and these people. He loved nothing more than to have them come and sit around the table. I mean, I stood at that table to have them come and sit around the table and write the magazine, The Dial, and talk about life. But it was all very intimate, right? It was very intimate, a very small group of people, very intimate. That was his sustenance, right? That and walking in nature and finding these minds and hearts that were walking a similar path. He really was. Wow. Yeah. So I don't have any information about like an event or an awakening or anything like that. I just think, I just think he was so open and willing just to be present. What's going on? How is this with me? You know what I mean? He was like constantly, I think, as he was, you know what I mean? And he was like, and then it was being revealed like, oh, wow, there's life. Oh, wow, that's how that happened. I mean, what an extraordinary, so most people think of him as a writer and a speaker and a philosopher, but I think that you have absolutely properly put him in the label mystic. I think that's he spent a lot of time walking around the world.
And he spoke. He really was a speaker. He spoke so many times. And what do you think it was that really engaged people?
Well, there's this fabulous story. He got famous. He got famous for being a rebel. He got famous for his writing. Nature was, of course, his first big publication. He got, lots of accolades, and he started speaking, and he started going out on the Chautauqua circuit, and then they started paying attention to him, newspaper articles and blah, blah, blah. So there's this lovely quote. It's a little bit, let's just say clearly it's politically incorrect. It was it's a quote of a newspaper from the time, from that time period, probably in the 1840s or so, 1850s maybe. And I don't remember exactly when. And so the newspaper journal, and, the guy's writing a newspaper article, Emerson's, come to our town, and people are flocking, and he talks to a woman he calls a char woman. Not exactly sure what that means, but my assumption is maybe a little bit underclass.
A charwoman.
Char, C-H-A-R. I'm not exactly sure what it references, right? But I get that it means.
In England, a charwoman would have been a servant or a cleaner or somebody that was kind of like a slang saying.
Great. And maybe that's where that came from, and they were still using it, right? So he identifies this woman this way. Good, right? We would obviously never do that, but that's this quote. And so I think what he's trying to say, not an educated person, not somebody who's been to university, etc. And he says, so how do you find Emerson? How was the speech tonight? And her comment is, I don't understand half of what he's saying, but I love the fact that he believes I can.
Oh, nice.
Isn't that just beautiful? Right.
Oh.
And so you get the experience that Emerson's he's not berating people. He's not, saying don't follow the mob and what are you doing? Right. I mean, he might have a little bit of that, like Jesus did with the Pharisees and he certainly talked about don't follow the Europeans, get your own thoughts. Just because it was written, 1,000 years ago doesn't mean it's, the gospel or whatever. But that quote makes me think of that he spoke with such belief in the soul of every person that was listening, that it didn't, education and whether or not they read all these people and philosophers and all of that was immaterial, that it was the independence of their own soul that he was speaking to. Man, yes. I mean, that I thought was just such a telling quote that reporter got from that woman. I don't always understand everything he says, but I love that he believes that I can. So clearly he didn't dumb it down. Clearly he was inspiring people.
Yes.
I think he spoke from love.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wouldn't it be amazing to have...
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say if we had a recording of him, that would just be amazing if we could have...
Yeah.
And I love, like, when you're talking that he was born in 1803 and he passed in 1882, so like when you said that he went to Europe twice, that's kind of a big deal. It's not like he just hopped on a jet and zipped over there, but just all this wisdom, this enlightened wisdom during this time frame, I just think it makes it even a little more wow to hear about this.
Well, and I think that's really important, Kathy, right? Remember that for us, this is now part of our culture, right? It's part of our heritage. We say some of these things without thinking about it. But think about that he stood in Harvard Divinity School and spoke about what wasn't working about what they were doing. He stood in his own pulpit and said, I cannot teach this. It's no longer in alignment with my soul and my understanding. I mean, it was only in 1863 that the Parliament of the World Religions came, and that I think it was Krishnamurti was the first speaker, right? It's in the late 1850s that we do in fact see this influx of Oriental from the East. Just an opening to some of these new ideas from a very different religion, a very different spirituality, a different point of view. All of that's relatively new. And he was just out there doing these amazing things that we, to a certain extent, we're like, yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, I get that. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, you got to contextualize, right? I mean, he really is truthfully talking to a group of people. 95% of people are practicing Christians. They go, they all go to church every Sunday. Oh, that's the other thing he said. I love this. I can't remember whether I read this in a journal or whether I read this in an article quoting him. Now I can't remember exactly, but he said, "Oh yeah, you can get away with saying on Wednesday what would be considered blasphemy on a Sunday."
Well, there you go.
Right.
Which is why he got out of the pulpit and started doing the speaking circuit.
Yes.
Nice. Well, he had a little more
And
freedom.
he still
there.
had,
yeah.
And he contained the community and even grew it.
Yep.
Speaking his truth.
Speaking his truth, what, would be considered blasphemy from a pulpit at that time period, in a big way, right? He found a way to continue to explore it and share it and talk about it. Yeah, I mean, that's really something. And so I really recommend, there's a series of addresses that are totally worth reading. It's totally worth reading the Harvard Divinity School address, especially to anyone who is seeking to become a minister. Oh my God, you want to have it in your face. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Brilliant writing. The Lord's Supper, the address called the Lord's Supper, really calls us to our authenticity, to our spiritual, what should we say? The authenticity of our spiritual practice, right? So we're not doing meditation because somebody told us we should do meditation. We're doing it because we have explored it and we've come to understand it's valuable, right? And if we don't, then don't do it. Don't do it. So it invites us to ask ourselves these questions, right? The next one is one called the American Scholar. It's an address that I can't remember where he gives, and it really talks about this over what shall we say? Over reliance on education. And boy, do we see it today. If you don't have a degree, well, we have seen it. It's changing now because we need tradespeople. But if you don't have a degree, then you're nobody. You're nothing. And so that's really, really excellent and still very poignant. And the one that I love is read the essay called the address called The Transcendentalist. And when you read the essay, The Transcendentalist, you can simply, every time he uses the word transcendentalist, you can put in there religious scientist.
Nice.
And read it, and it will be so both inspiring and a little wake-up call, right? He's always good at those little wake-up calls. And so when you read The Transcendentalist, just read, religious science or the new thought person or the, spiritual seeker, or you can, whatever, however you self-identify, substitute that word. It's really amazing. And so with these addresses, we don't usually get to because we're usually reading the essays, right? And so the 5 essays that are generally focused on are self-reliance, compensation, spiritual laws, the oversoul. Can't believe I've forgotten the 5th one. Holy moly.
Nature.
Circles. That's the one. Self-reliance, compensation, circles, spiritual laws, and the oversoul. And if you read them in that order, you also see the progression of the philosophy. You see the progression of the thinking when you read them in that order. And you see him moving from the human experience, the human engagement with alignment through the reality of the law to that mystical experience of the oneness and the oversoul. You can literally just track that growth, right? And it's not like anything's left behind, right? It's transcend and include. You go to the next level and you bring it with you, right? So you're bringing all that with you. So those are the 5 essays we tend to focus on.
I think you might have just answered the question I had was, so what would you say is Emerson's main teaching? What did he really discover? Because you talked about the progression.
Well, it's always a question, did he discover it or not? What he articulated, I think, was this mean, it's really truthfully, it's the spiritual growth that we go through. We discover, I mean, if you can almost lay it over the four kingdoms of consciousness that Michael Beckwith or Marcia Sutton talk about, right? The first is to discover the immanent indwelling presence, the I that I am, right? This like, wow, I have my own way of being in the world, and it's important, and I shouldn't try to be like everybody else, right? And I have to actually live according to my deepest passions. And then out of that, we begin to see in compensation and circles, we begin to see how that is reflected in the world when we are doing it or not doing it, right? And we get the, whatever, what goes around comes around, everything is moving in circles, and right. And so we get to, he was exploring all of these ideas, and that compensation, there is no, we teach it in Science of Mind. There's no reward and punishment. It's just benefit and consequence. That's all. That's all it is. So he explores all of that, right? So so it's a deep immersion in the law, kind of culminating with spiritual laws, but spiritual laws is now the use of all of that, right? So we've moved through all of Kingdom 2, and then we move into Kingdom 3, into the Oversoul, and we start pushing into Kingdom 4, right? Oh, wait, there's actually the first half of the Oversoul is about the pipe that is hollow and smooth, and the light that shines from behind and shines through the pipe onto life. That's all Kingdom 3 language. And then is the turning point, right? The turning point where he says, the fact that I am here shows that the soul has need of an organ here. Shall I not assume the post? And from that point on, he's in Kingdom 4. And he's in that mystical experience of oneness. And you can just see him cultivating this progression, which is extraordinary. And then he has, many other essays about life and nature and history and, lots of different things. But that's kind of the progression of the philosophy that he has pulled out in these essays.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, wow.
Thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge everybody that's here as well, joining us today. Fiona and Ardelia and Tim, and that's commented and left some wonderful comments. We have another comment here from DM Murphy. It's quite a long one, but I'm just going to pop it up here anyway.
Wow, I love this,
because there's been a wonderful response from people that are really enjoying hearing what you are speaking on, and your explanation of Emerson. Thank you so much.
Yay,
for
thank
sharing.
You. I think too many people put Emerson on the shelf as an intellectual. Right. And they're like, yeah, whatever. I'm just going to be a heart-centered person. And I don't, we should remember that consciousness is head and heart and body combined. There is actually no separation from head and heart. And Emerson is just an amazing, amazing opportunity for, opening our consciousness. That's my plug.
There's something. There's just one thing I want to know, because I know that we have 10 minutes. Do we have time, Reverend Kathy? I just want to ask this one question because I'm really interested. You talked about Quimby, Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, who was actually born in the same year as Emerson, and from what I have learned, they didn't actually meet each other physically. And yet here we have Quimby, who was working his way with, seeing over 12,000 people and healing them and having these amazing revelations with individual people one at a time. And then Emerson, kind of an introvert and yet out there doing this on the speaking circuit and touching and reaching so many people's lives in a different way. And yet people were still being, the revealing was still happening for them. It's just so incredible. I find that this was happening at the same time, and for them reaching so many people.
Yeah,
with this
Well,
teaching.
And it is, I mean, this is one of the truly American born philosophies, New Thought, right? It comes right out of New England. And it is really astonishing that, that it's happening with a number of different people from a slightly different perspective, slightly different personalities, right? Clearly, Emerson was a thinker. You kind of get the feeling that Quimby was a doer. I mean, he was a clockmaker, and so he wanted to heal people. Emerson wanted to think about things and talk about things, and we sometimes make one better than the other. You can see they're both necessary. It's equally important and valuable, right? Speak to us differently, inspire us differently. And that whole time period was a hotbed of all of this. And, it's not dissimilar to what happened with the Romantic poets in England. It was a big hotbed of, right. And you see that in schools of art. And, there's like a movement in consciousness that is revealed and is taking everything to the next level. And yeah, it is fascinating. And I can't imagine they would not have like read about each other, maybe in the newspaper and stuff like that, but they were really traveling in different circles and actually had an entirely different project that they were, about. And so, but they were clearly all in the same milieu. You wonder what was in the water and the air in New England at that time, right?
And but you take people there.
I do.
You travel there and take people on a tour.
I do. And it's
so
super. It's the roots of New Thought. We started in Belfast and we study Quimby, and we go to Concord and study Emerson. We go to Walden Pond and study Thoreau. We go to Boston and we study Emma Curtis Hopkins and Mary Baker Eddy. And in each case, we're asking ourselves not only what is it about them, but then what is it about us, right? So when we do a day and a half on Emerson, we're talking about, we use the Lord's Supper and we ask ourselves, so where am I being true to my spiritual practice and belief, and where am I not? Where am I going along? Where am I doing things because, well, that's what they do at my center? We ask really, and then we have to confront the dualism that comes out of Christianity, and Emerson confronts that head on. And where are we with that? So we just really, we kind of dive into each one. It's a little mini dive in each one along the way. And of course, we go in the fall when it's beautiful and gorgeous and glorious. And so, yeah, it's very, very fun. So you have to come with me sometime.
Oh, amazing. Yes. Me and Reverend Kathy will be there.
Road trip.
2024 in New England.
2024. Absolutely. Absolutely. We'll do another one. It's really fabulous. And we do a small group. We do just one bus load. If you it's got just one bus load. That is more than enough people. So it's very intimate.
Mm-hmm. And people, if you're interested, you can, anyone that's interested can contact you directly at CSL Dallas to find out more about that as it comes nearer to the time, 2024. Exciting.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Yep, very much so.
Wow. Thank you.
Thank you for asking me. I love being with you guys and doing this. I just love what you're doing. The mystics of wisdom of the mystics of New Thought. I think it's superb. And I have loved being a part of it both times.
Well, thank you. We're really grateful to have you here and your enthusiasm and your knowledge. But again, how you integrate it into our teachings of New Thought and Science of Mind to make it practical and connecting all those dots to say, oh my God, now I wrote down, I have to get all these addresses of Emerson's and I want to learn more, so I think that's the neat thing is we learn enough that we go, I want to learn more. And so we can really deepen and for our own personal spiritual growth and for everyone out here in our New Thought community here. Right. We're just really grateful that they're here and they're obviously loving what you're sharing. So we're very, very grateful for you, Dr. Petra.
Yay. Super. It's really my pleasure.
Yes.
And that's the thing, right? If we make people real to us, then when we read their words, it's not so dry. And you think about this man
Yes.
whose heart has been broken twice, who, got all of his real education walking in the woods, and then read his material. Changes everything, takes it out of that whole, oh, it's very, intellectual, takes it all out of that space. It's very cool.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for shining the light on Ralph Waldo Emerson today, and for just being you and saying yes to this. And I'm thinking, oh, is there another mystic that Dr. Petra can come and talk about? But, thank you. And thank you to everybody that's been present and watching. And if you're watching this now or at any later date, then there's a whole series of these that are, I think they're also on the archives. Are they, Reverend Kathy?
Yes,
Being kept
they
on
sure
the
are.
archives.
Yes.
And they are. And on the archives YouTube page and website, and on New Thought Media Network on the YouTube page, you can find all of the past episodes, so you can get a real education and grounding in these wonderful mystics that are the foundation of our teachings.
Yeah.
Well, and so thank you for being here.
I love that you're doing it across the pond too, right? From Colorado to UK. I think that's fabulous. Thanks for doing this for all of us.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really grateful. It's truly a blessing. Again, because since I started the archive years ago, it's how can we bring this to life? How can we make it interesting? And how is it relevant in our world? And it absolutely is. So let's do fun things, to do that. And our next one on June 14th, we're going to have Dr. Tom Sander talk about Thomas Troward. And so, oh my God. That's
there we go. We're coming to the UK, to Scotland.
Yeah.
You can create the tour over there.
That would be cool too, right?
Oh yes, and we can all come over here with spirit tours.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it'll be a little easier than than Emerson when he went over.
Yes.
Get there a little quicker.
Yes.
Well,
thank you again, Dr. Petra, for being here, and thank you to everybody that's been watching and listening. And we'll be back here next week. And of course, you've been watching the New Thought Media Network and through the archives. And we have, I'm just going to put this up here. No, I haven't got the link. I was going to put the link up to our support donate button for New Thought Media Network. And I'm trying to find that link. Here it is. I just want to pop it up here to give everybody the opportunity to really support and be woven into the consciousness of New Thought Media Network, the programming that we intentionally broadcast here every single day of the year. All sorts of amazing things. So share this page with your friends. Share this video out, this teaching out, the mystics teaching today with your friends, like our Facebook page. And I'm passing you over to Reverend Kathy for a moment as I say goodbye. And Reverend Kathy.
Thank you. Yeah. And thank you, Laura. And thank you, New Thought Media Network. I mean, it's just the programming just keeps grows and gets more dynamic. And so it really is bringing this wisdom out to the world. And so the Science Mind Archives website, sciencemindarchives.com, we have a new volunteer who's putting new content on our website. And so we have like 10 quote in air quotes, right, new Ernest Holmes articles and things that you can find. So we're going to keep adding more so you can deepen into the wisdom of Ernest Holmes that was, brought to us thanks to Emerson. It's just all those foundational teachings. And just, you never know when you're going to read that one thing that's going to change your life. It's just so valuable and so important to keep growing and learning and to following your inner guidance of what's next for me to learn. And so grateful for the archives and New Thought Media Network and Dr. Petra and CSL Dallas and all the incredible centers literally worldwide, revealing a world that works for everyone. And so we're grateful.
Me too. Thank you so much. both of you. I just love being with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we will see you back here in 2 weeks' time. Stay tuned in because we have more programming here on the network right after this show. Bye for now.
Bye.